the Greeks had the word muse, right? And they're not the only ones who had that sort of notion. And I'm not saying I literally believe in the muse, but they're describing the same thing I think that we're talking about, right? Like, what is this thing, right? But they at least had some kind of poetic language for it to exist, like to where they were acknowledging that there's something that's beyond the person that's involved, and that thing is really fucking important, right? Because it's like, if the muse didn't show up for you, it means your work is shit. Right? Yeah. It means it's like, oh man, it's not inspired. There's nothing going on. And what is that?
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Exploring the challenges of the creative call
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art. Let's shoot the shit, as you just said to me, Brandon. I thought, you know what? That's how I'm going to open it up. Because shit is actually, I think, my favorite swear word. Like, it is, because there's just so many ways that you can combine it. I think we've had this conversation before in candid conversation, unrecorded. Anyhow, folks, we're diving into a podcast, diving into a recording. Not exactly sure what we're going to be talking about in this one. We're kind of just, squeezing one in, which has to happen in the podcast world sometimes. You gotta slot one in there, and you just jump in. And I don't know. I think that the only thing that I have going on for me to just open this thing up with is, I was thinking a little bit about intuition and symbols and imagination and things. And that's partially spurred on by, I was taken through this exercise from a friend of mine who's, been in shamanic disciplines for a while. And it was kind of like about connecting to an animal, and sort of just took us through this, this imaginary thing where we were just visualizing this sort of thing as he was describing it. And then there was something about the whole thing where there was the things that came up, like how I was picturing the things that he was describing. And at the end of it, with myself and everyone who is a part of this, everyone having like a different thing to tell, as we were all telling about like what we saw, what we heard, I was like, it's such a fascinating thing that can happen when you just kind of go and enter into this type of space that isn't purely intellectual, I guess, because I did catch myself at certain points of this thing going up into my head and just being like, what do I like what's supposed to happen right now? What do I think is supposed to happen? Which is funny because I teach this exact same thing to actors, where it's just like, you don't know what's supposed to happen, right? Like you can't, like, you're involved with what you think should be happening as opposed to what's actually happening. And it's like, we can do the same thing with ourselves, where it's literally my mind doesn't know the thing that's supposed to be happening at all. Mm-hmm. Like, this is something that is completely in the realm of, you have to go into it with an absolute open mind, just paying attention to the stuff that's just arising inside of you. Sometimes it's words, sometimes it's sounds, sometimes it's images, whatever it is. And then it's interesting because there's a whole different quality to when suddenly my mind was like jumping in. It's like, wait, what's going on in here? Right? Shouldn't it supposed to be going in this direction or that direction? It's like, I don't know. I don't know what direction it's supposed to be, and I know that you don't know what direction it's. So there was times I had to kind of talk myself, like, to just like calm, breathe, relax, just stay with the image of where I am right now. And it was really a fascinating kind of little exercise that we went on, and it was like going on like a personal little spirit journey in a kind of way, where there was like a connection to animals and stuff like that. But I walked away from that just being like, man, where is that stuff all coming from? Where is all of this rich stuff coming from, and the imagery that comes up and the significance behind it? Because it's like, it's coming up out of a place that is not contrived. Right. And so I'll just leave it there and see if that stirred up anything for you.
Well, it definitely stirred some stuff up, man. What an interesting way to begin. Yeah. I've been writing a lot of stories. I'm like deep in a few of them, and these new ones are happening, and like, it's interesting because like my capacity to be able to manage several stories at once, like I remember when I started like storytelling and writing, you could handle like one, and like two, you'd start to get like pulled away. But in this case, it's different. It's more like every story is informing the other story, and they're all helping each other, and they're totally different. Like, the most recent one that I started writing, I was not planning on really writing a story. It was like, and it's weird how this stuff happens, man, but I'm kind of like going with what you're saying. It's like, I don't know where this is going. So I started writing this book, and I've been writing this book, and it's like it's not fair to call it a self-help book. It's more like here's some shit I learned. There's the shit word. Here's some shit I learned, and these are some perspectives I have that I found effective, and it's almost like I'm writing it like to my future child. Like, here is my life. This is what I learned. These are the things I did. This is, like, and I'll give you an example. For example, this painful moment you're in, this moment that you think is absolute hell, and you can't understand why it's there, and it's just uncomfortable and painful, and you just, that is a moment where you're being given a gift. You need to see that as a gift. You need to look at that as there's a lesson. There's something you're getting that you don't know you're asking for. Like, say you have this vision or this dream, which is another part of the book, because I talk about vision in the book, but it's like you have this vision and this thing you think you want. You're going to have the character to be able to go and get that vision. This hard moment is actually getting you that vision. This is what's carving you into the person you need to be to go into that thing that you say you want to go to. So don't look at it as a bad thing. And so as I started working this book, I've totally outlined it. I've been writing the chapters. It's coming along fantastic. And I'm like, what would really fucking put this over the edge? If I added like a little bit of story to it, like a little, and I had these images of like this mythical story, like in a mythical kind of world where this character was in a small village and he had this dream of going out like beyond the mountains and into this like world, right? And kind of like The Alchemist was a book that I read, and it always kind of like, I'm like, it's almost a little bit like The Alchemist. Like, it's my best reference. I started writing this story. I got a whole other book now. I got a whole, like, this story has taken a life of its own, and they're entering these environments, like they're climbing these mountains, and then they're in this forge, and they end up at this other village, and then at one point, but each place they end up in, it like, so all of this whole story is based on the book that I wrote originally, which has all these lessons, but now the lessons are becoming manifest in the narrative. And I've never written a mythical story in my life, and it's fucking like Lord of the Rings shit. Like, it's not fair for me to like compare it. Like, it's because I'm not trying to compare myself. I'm just like, where is this coming from? I didn't even know this was in me. I've never even thought about writing a story like this. I've never even had an inclination to write a story like this. But for some reason, this story and these lessons, they like are like a perfect pairing. So I get what you're saying. It's like, I don't know where this is going. I don't know what this is. And I'm just kind of, and these characters are joining this one character, right? these characters are joining them on their journey, and then they're interacting with these other characters that are kind of, they're passing through, and I'm like, where the hell are these people coming from? Like, they're just, and the seamless, it's like, am I writing this story, or is this story writing me? I don't know what's happening anymore. And that's what I'm talking about. It's like, I just started from a place of trying to communicate my thoughts in an organized way through a book. And then the next thought was, I think I could communicate this a little bit better if I use some of my story skills to kind of like give a narrative to this. And then the narrative has been born, and now it's becoming its own thing. And I'm like, well, I don't want to abandon the book that I wrote, but I also want to indulge in this story. I like both of them. And by the way, I mean, people on the podcast, I'm also writing a screenplay, a play, a novel, a bunch of other stuff. So I got all this stuff on the go. But now this one's kind of vying for my attention. And it's like, yeah, come on in. Like, it's just like, I haven't forgotten about these other stories. And it's interesting, man. That's all I can say. So yeah, I'm excited to see where this goes, because it is weird when you hit that point where you just get real present and you let it come out of you, as opposed to going, this should go over here and I'm going to do this tactical thing or whatever.
Yeah, there's these things that come from the deep, like, and the deep, I don't know why that word is just like kind of just going off in my head right now with what you were talking about. But yeah, there's this stuff and it's big, it's really big, and it's vast, and it's deeply personal. And yet it's also like this stuff that's also deeply connected to all of humanity. I think that's, it's from that place that creates the necessity of art, right? And the art, the art forms are precisely that. They are there. They give form to things that come from that place, right? Like, because they in some way are able to describe things that can't just be described through some literal method of communication, right? We need metaphors, and we need analogies, and we need these stories, that in some way they can communicate, whether it be wisdom or some truth about who and what we are. Like, they're able to communicate that in a way that you just can't in I guess a more scientific kind of way, which is why, we still have art, right? Which is why science hasn't replaced art, and it seems ridiculous to think that could be a thing, like it's like it can't do that thing, because it's not what it's supposed to do, right? Just like art isn't really supposed to try, like doing an expressionist piece on, how to perform heart surgery, like that, there could be something interesting. That could be an interesting thing to see how that comes out, but it's definitely not something that someone's going to fucking look at in a textbook and be like, okay, I can do this. Yeah. Like, it's like these have different functions, these have different roles, and yeah, these things come from somewhere inside us. And and I've listened to a lot of people, I've even read some people who, they have tried to reduce that as to just being like, well, that's just the function of this doing that thing and this thing and whatever. And my argument against that is always just like, yeah, but that's not the experience of it. Right? Like, that's not how I experience that thing. The experience, like, I'm not saying that that's not happening. I'm not saying that, certain parts of our brain aren't firing when we're having those moments of connection and expression and flow, and it's all just like pouring into whatever this art is. 100%. Like, there's a connection that's there, but to say that that's the thing that's doing it is kind of like bizarre to me. It's like it's just like, yeah, but but why is it doing it now and in this moment? And why is it creating this feel? Why is there this feeling that's coming with it? Why is there this intoxication and of the experience of creation? Like well, that's just the chemicals it's releasing these chemicals. Yeah, but why is it releasing these chemicals? Why do we as human beings have a response like that? Like there's just, you can keep on prying into this stuff, and eventually, it leads to kind of an inexplicable kind of place, and you have to just sort of say, it's like, well, it's phenomenological, okay? Which is like, that's like the last bastion of trying to take something that's inexplicable and explain it, right? But it's like, that's what you say for the things that are inexplicable. It's phenomenological, and it still kind of sounds scientific. Anyhow, that's just a little piece I'll throw into that one. But phenomenological, yeah, which is it's a phenomenon, right? Wow, how about that? And there's nothing necessarily wrong with something remaining mysterious. There was something. Oh yeah, that was what it was. I was trying to, like, there's a quote that I heard once. As per usual, I can't remember who said it, but they said something. Bear with me, folks. It was something like eventually all sciences lead to theology, right? Like where it reaches a certain point, and you can even see this in something like physics, right? Like the most sort of like, crazy, like what is like quantum mechanics and string theory and stuff like that. I don't know about the truth of it necessarily, but like I know, like, you can listen to a lot of physicists talk about the very bleeding edge of what they understand about the universe, and it starts to sound like really almost woo-woo to a certain extent. Like it almost starts to sound very spiritual in a kind of way where it's just like you start to still require a certain kind of language in order to describe these vast, crazy things. So I'm out, Brandon.
Well, I think, one of the things that you have to accept as a person is that you only perceive this tiny little bit of what's actually happening. Here's some science for you. I don't know what the equation is, but it's something like, for example, if there's like 1 million bits of information or 2 million bits of information or 1 billion bits of information or whatever it is, you, at a given moment, you take in like something like 3 to 7 bits. Like it's like ridiculous. Like there's all this stuff going on, and you're like looking at things through like a straw. You're like, we barely see anything. So it stands to reason that our perception of reality is mostly the straw that we're looking through, not what's actually at the end of the straw. Like, let alone what's outside of the straw that we don't see. So like, I think the thing is that the thing that we're getting into today with creativity is that creativity, it seeps in a way that's not direct. So when you use your mind to say, like, you want to write a story and you go, oh no, I'm going to write I've met writers like this, and they're very, very well trained, and they can't write anything good. For the life of them, they can't, and they don't know why. And they have all the tools, and they use all the tools, and it's just never really good. It never works. It never does anything to you. And they're constantly frustrated. And they don't like the answer that this technique isn't going to solve your problem. And that's why, like, when I teach storytelling, I will teach people techniques because there's these really great tools you can use, but they're more like an approach. It's like, if my character starts off at a low point in the beginning of the scene, it stands to reason that it would be probably interesting if they ended at a high point. That's like a traditional scene structural idea, right? Where it's like, from low to high or high to low, and then you go through a couple mountains and valleys on the way through, and that's, it's like standard basic stuff. And there's some logic to that. It's like reasonable. But you don't necessarily, like, if you try to do that in a linear way, you're going to miss what you're actually doing, because you don't know you don't know what is supposed to happen, because you don't know you don't know the journey. All you have is kind of like, this is where I start and this is my destination. And if you try to like do that journey linear, like a linear journey, you will have a shitty journey, because the audience already knows what you're going to do, because you know what you're going to do, and you begin to telegraph it. And this is the thing I found out about writing, is that I have to go and convince myself this is what I'm going to do, and then let myself not do it. But I literally go in like, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And then the moment something catches wind, like, it's not like I'm being like airy fairy, like, oh, don't hang on to like no, I really try to hang on to it, but something, it shifts you aside. And then you go, well, I can't not pursue this now. This came up. It has to be done. It has to be dealt with. So like, I'll give you an example how this works. I've shared this scene before. I'll use it again. You have a couple in the morning and they're making breakfast. One of them is making breakfast. The other one got up late. The other one asked, how do you like your eggs? How do you like your eggs could be literal. How do you like your eggs? Well, scrambled. Okay. Boring. How do you like your eggs? That person's also thinking in subtext, how do I tell them that we're about to get divorced? So now we got an interesting secret going on. So this already creates something. So, okay, great. Now as a writer, I'm going to use the technique of secret. And here's my secret. It's a divorce. That's not the real secret. That's the secret I think is about to happen. The real secret is something I don't even know yet as the writer. And I need to be open to the fact that that's going to appear to me through some means that I don't know yet. And when it happens in the middle of the scene, so that new secret, that real reveal, which might even be a couple other reveals beyond, that's what's going to make this thing take flight. That's what's going to make this thing go into something normal. That's why your first draft sucks, because your first draft generally has these linear ideas where it's like, this is what I'm going to do. And this is, and like, as you get more experienced, you just stop doing the linear shit. You like, just let it go. That's like the reason why I'm like working on several stories and they're all kind of working is because I can't get, the one thing that's nice about working on several stories, I know I'm jumping here, but one thing that's nice about working on several stories at once is I'm so not attached to any of them that when something cool comes up in one of them, I'm like, let's run with it. And then something else comes up, I'm like, let's run. I don't got time to think this shit out. Let's just, if that comes up, well, that's interesting. Let's explore that. Boom. All of a sudden you go down this road and it just fucking leads somewhere. And then you're like, wow, I'm in this whole new territory I never even planned on being in. And once you're in that territory, just all this weird shit happens. And then you're in new territory, and you were in new territory already, but you're in new territory that you only could have gotten had you gotten to that first new territory. And so, you get to a point in a story where you follow this kind of methodology of like, what do you call it? What was that word you used? That science word? That phenomenological writing, man. It's like, well, logically, he just went from here and he went from there, and his brain naturally thought, hey, there's a it doesn't work like that. It's a feeling. It's like, it's a hit. It's something happens and you're emotionally spurred on. And then the next thing, you're pretty soon, you follow that just a couple times, 2 or 3 times, you're into territory you don't even know where you are anymore. And then you're just dealing with it. And if you're doing it honestly, and what I mean by honestly is you're not favoring one character over the other, you're both giving them the steelman arguments that they need. You're giving them a leg to stand on, and they're really having a real battle. Man, you're like, I don't know who's coming out of the other side of this. I don't know what's going to happen. How? And then how are we going to get out of this? And you're this other character, and you're positioned writing them some dialogue or writing something else. You're like, I don't know how we're going to deal with this. Well, what would you do? And then you go, well, I would do this. And then then that other person sees that response. You go, well, what would you do had they done this? And all of a sudden you got this character who's like, how do you want your eggs? And they're all pissed off at this person. And they're like, I'm going to drop the divorce papers on them. And the next thing you know, that person's crying in the other person's arms saying like, I don't feel like you love me. And you went on this journey and the audience goes like, maybe that was its natural conclusion. But the thing is that the journey that got us there was so fucking real, it doesn't even matter. But if you tried to linearly write that, that's what I'm saying, is it doesn't work. And this is the problem with technique. But I threw that in as a note.
Oh man. Okay. You got some lots of stuff churning up in my being here, Brandon. There's a few things and they're all kind of connected to each other, I think, here. But so to me, I never used to, for a long time, I never really saw, art this way. And, my discipline of acting primarily, right? But it's all art to me is a form of seeking. And part of that seeking means you're not entirely sure what it is. That's at the end of it. It's like every new thing that you do is like some kind of a pilgrimage that you're taking to some holy site, yeah. Right? Where you're just like, I don't know, like, it's like, you're heading at kind of, you're going in this direction, you're heading for this place, right? But you've got to walk every freaking mile to get there. And there's going to be all sorts of stuff that happens along the way. And that's what you want. Like part of like the idea of the pilgrimage is that it takes you to places inside of yourself. It takes you to places of where you find out truth about yourself and about, like the big questions, right? And I'm, it's very much that way within art. Like it's like you're heading out on this pilgrimage, and you have to have that sort of that mind that is in that place of open seeking. And I think that that's the thing that's missing from so many people who are in art form, because you're talking about writers, but I'm like, I can say the same thing about actors too. You say the same thing about musicians. I promise you, any art that anyone's intimate with, if you spent time with it, there's people who are in there who have all of this training, who have so much knowledge, like they basically fucking know it all, and yet there's stuff just never comes alive. Their stuff just never, and I've been there. I've been in that place, like in that, and that put me in a place of absolute disillusionment for like a couple of years while I was in the middle of trying to have an acting career, where I was just like, I can't set foot into a class right now. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing here. I don't know what's going on. I've learned more than I've ever known about this thing, and yet what am I doing? Like, this doesn't feel good when I show up. I don't know what the point of acting is for me anymore. Like it was just this thing that was a different kind of seeking that I had to go on then, right? I was like a more of a, something that was more directly personal. But that was ultimately kind of a place that I, without necessarily putting the words of seeking to it, but it was like, that was the place that I ended up going to, which was like, oh, I need to stop trying to control this. I need to, like, when I'm doing this thing, when I'm acting, I need to let go of control. I need to listen. I need to respond. I need to let this mysterious thing happen, this thing from the deep space to come up and just do its thing. And suddenly it was like, wow, all of these qualities that I wanted in my acting were happening, and happening so much more organically and naturally, effortlessly. And as a result, I was having just so much fun doing it again. Right. And it meant having to let go of that control, let go of that sense of knowing, like, I know what's supposed to happen here, or I know what's going to happen. It's just like it, and instead going to like, I have no fucking idea what's going to happen. Yeah. Right? Even though I've rehearsed this scene with this person how many times and we're about to perform it, I still have no idea what's going to happen when we get up there. Anything could happen, you know, and it's true. And sometimes that it could be something like literally my partner does something so completely different than what happened in rehearsals, or it could be different in the sense that because for whatever reason I had some level of presence in this moment that I suddenly understand the words that I'm saying or something about the circumstance in a much more profound way. And sometimes I'm so much more deeply connected to what's going on. Like there's all of these things that can only happen when you're in that open space. Mm-hmm. Right. And, you know, I think that, you know, there's a real loss that's happened for many artists. And it's one that as I touched on, that I know I went through, where there's this sort of these ideas that we have about how this thing is supposed to shake out, right? And by throwing more technique at the problem, we'll fix it, and doesn't leave room for something else. And it just makes me think of, you know, like back in the day, like the Greeks had the word muse, right? And they're not the only ones who had that sort of notion. And I'm not saying I literally believe in the muse, but they're describing the same thing I think that we're talking about, right? Like, what is this thing, right? But they at least had some kind of poetic language for it to exist, like to where they were acknowledging that there's something that's beyond the person that's involved, and that thing is really fucking important, mm-hmm. right? Because it's like, if the muse didn't show up for you, it means your work is shit. Right? Yeah. It means like, it's like, oh man, it's not inspired. There's nothing going on. There's, you know, and what is that? Right? What is that? And it's like, yeah, it's, you know, all these people who they know all the technical things about what they do, but yet the work doesn't ignite its audience. It might not even ignite the artist themselves, you know, like so yeah, I don't know. Like there's something. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I just my thought is that one thing I think as artists and creatives, we need to give ourselves a little bit of room here. You're your first audience member, so you need to find a way to get yourself activated, inspired, whatever, and doesn't mean that you're going to do something other people are going to like. Actually, in fact, you might actually do some really subpar kind of shitty work. I don't think you need to worry about that. Like I've had writers, I wrote this scene, like I can't wait for you to read it. And, you know, and like, I remember this writer talking to me and he's like, yeah. And then this character said this and this character said that. And I was like, I don't know if that scene was good, but they were connected to something. They were hitting on something. Something was working for them and flowing for them. That's where it starts, because like the thing is you don't really know what you're doing. Like, you have to, like, if you try to do it right to impress people, I think this is where I run to a bit of a slippery slope. I'll speak on writing because it's like where I spend most of my discipline these days. I do think that there's these kind of writing techniques that they're very effective, but they can be done in an uninspired way, and they can be done in a way where it's like they don't carry the weight that they need to carry, but they kind of do the job, but they don't do the job well. They don't do it right. And so it's like, so for example, if you're a writer and you know, oh, I can do a cliffhanger here. What a great moment. Well, a cliffhanger is going to be effective. If you set it up properly, there's a way in which you could logically think about it and go like, oh, they're really going to want to know this. The problem is that you're kind of doing it under a manipulation. You're doing it like you're using this technique and you know how the technique works, and so it does work when you do it. The problem is that you got there under like false means. It's like, and the audience has to get emotionally invested and involved for that thing to matter, for that cliffhanger, for them to really want to know. Like, I've been watching some shows recently, and I've been just looking at their cliffhangers and just kind of like, okay, when's a good one and when's a not one? And something I noticed, it dawned on me, and this happened over the last couple of weeks. I was like, man, this one show I watched, I really fucking cared. And it's like, I gotta know what's gonna happen. And this other one I watched, I'm like, yeah, they did the tool, but I couldn't really care. I don't like, I could take it or leave it. If I never watched the next episode and I didn't know the answer, I could have walked away. I would have been fine. But the other show, they just did it right. They got me to care. They got me invested. They got me involved. So like, what I'm saying is that you can use the technique, but there's still this other thing going on. Like these things work symbiotically. And if you're trying to like think about every single piece, you're going to lose track because you don't know where the hooks are. Like you have these ideas, like cliffhangers is what I call it, is a kind of a hook, right? It hooks you in. Basically, it hooks you into watching the next episode or hanging around for the commercial break to see the next thing. That's kind of the technique of the tool, right? And it's used so much that it's amazing that any of us even care about it anymore almost, right? But we've all seen it, and we all love a good one, but we don't actually care. We like don't care when it's not a good one, but it's like, it's invisible. You don't even know it's there. You like it happened, but you know, so like I was thinking about like a teacher grading, say a script, right? Like, let's just say you went to like, the Rockefeller school system, and it was A's and B's and C's and fails, and you get a check mark if you did the right technique on your script, and someone just went through your script and they went, check mark. Oh, he did the cliffhanger. Oh, he did the hook. Oh, he has a character with a flaw. Check. It's just like you went through. It doesn't mean your script's going to be good. It just has all the markers of what generally makes a good script. But if I see that, let's say the character has a flaw, and what's a good combination? The character has a flaw and a secret, and they have this thing that they want, and we put say an antagonist that is way more powerful than them, and we set that up. Okay, so there's a few elements of story writing. If you did all that, you're probably off to a good start with writing a story. Doesn't mean it'll be interesting. What will be interesting is when we see you deal with that flaw in context to those things. So yeah, the character might have a flaw, but like, let's say the flaw is, I don't know, they can't speak. They don't have a voice. Okay, now they're in a situation where, so you go, oh, well, what would be a scary situation to put them in? So you can start to think about this. You go, okay, well, they're trapped and they're trying to get someone's attention, but they can't yell out to them because they can't speak. So they have to use other things. They have to try to make their noise, and they try to bang their fist against the wall, but it's cement, and the pounding of the flesh doesn't make enough noise. It's like they can't do, and they can't make enough noise to get rescued from the thing. All of that sounds good, right? It all sounds like an interesting situation. Imagine yourself being there. Then it's going to get interesting. Like, imagine that. How fucking scary that would be. That's when you're going to start to come up with answers that are going to be really interesting. What is that character going to do to figure this shit out? Because if they're stuck and they're going to die if no one rescues them, and they can't yell out and scream, your first thought as a writer is often the most obvious one. It's the one where you take for granted. It's like, well, I would just yell out to them. But if you can't do that, then what would you do? Then figure out what that one is. Make that not an option now. Cut that one out too. Then find out what you do. Well, shit, you're going to walk. I'll tell you what you're going to do, because I do this. You're going to go for a walk Because you're going to be like, I can't sit at this fucking desk anymore. I can't write. I have nothing to write. And you're going to walk and you're going to think about it. And if you really live in it and you really feel it, you're going to go, oh, they could do this. That's what the audience wants. They want that thing, that, what's that, right? And I'm not telling you it because I'm trying to get you as the audience, like, I want you to do that. I want you to go for that walk. I want you to have that aha moment. And if your story is filled with these aha moments, fuck, you'll get your audience right involved. And yeah, you can use all the techniques, but the techniques got to be filled with the right stuff. And that stuff doesn't come from intellectualizing. It comes from experience. And, you know, and experience. And the other thing I'll say one other rule about creativity, a law, not a rule, a law. It arrives when it's ready. If I could teach you one thing about creativity, true creativity, I would tell everybody it arrives when it's ready. Not when you're ready, when it's ready. And your job is to wait for it and not lose your patience. And know it's coming. And when it comes, you're going to be grateful. But if you walk away from the desk, if you don't think about the story anymore, if you don't hang in the pocket of the acting scene and let it arrive, if you don't do this, it will never show up for you because you weren't there for it. But you have to be there, and you just have to be there, and you have to be there, and you have to be there. And the best strategy I can tell you, well, when's it going to come? I don't know. It might come weeks later. Weeks. You're like, weeks? I got to get this thing done now. That's the thing. You have to be like accepting of that. And you're going to be laying in bed, and it's going to be 2 a.m. in the morning, and you can't sleep for some reason. And all of a sudden, that's it. And the difference now is, do you get out of bed and write that down? Do you, like, what do you do? And like, people don't like that because it's like not on your schedule, but that's a little bit more how it works.
Yeah. I mean, recently someone was telling me about, I can't remember the name, but it was like a famous scientist inventor who apparently used to take naps or go to sleep with like a heavy steel ball in his hand. And that was so like when he fell asleep, he would let go and the ball would hit the floor and it would jolt him awake, and he would have these ideas or these things that he'd been working on. Like suddenly he had an answer to these things because there was something, like, again, like it's not just artists, you know, it's like, it's Einstein had different things too, of like ways of getting out of his head and connecting to the deep, you know, just going like that thing of, because it was like, whoa, holy shit, eureka, right? There's this thing. Where did that even come from? Right? Like, but there's an intelligence, there's a knowing that, you know, sometimes we have to figure out ways how to access it. And it's one of those things where it's like, it can't be forced out, right? Like but there are things we can do to invite it. There are things that we can do to create a nice environment for it. You know, it's like, you gotta do all of these like things for it to show up, but it does usually show up, right? Because the main thing I think is attention, right? And also in everything that you were saying too, because like, you know, you're talking about a lot of tools, techniques, and things that go into, that are in a lot of great stories. But, you know, that thing is like, well, what set you out to write the story in the first place? To me, that's one of those, like, that's so important. It's like, what's that journey that you're going on, right? And it better be one that you care about, right? There better be something there that you don't even necessarily have to know what it is. In fact, that can be a fantastic thing. But there's got to be something inside you that's going like, I've got to go this way. I've got to go this way. I got to tell some story like this, right? Like, it might just be a vague, ambiguous notion that you start to just find out what it is as you go along, right? But that thing of, there's got to be that real, genuine thing there, because that's what's going to guide you through all that stuff. That's going to help you use all of those tools and techniques in a way that's actually appropriate, right? Or when to throw them away completely altogether, right? it was funny when you were talking about like, the scene of like trying to get the attention of somebody, but you can't speak. And what came up into my head immediately was Interstellar, which is, I would say, of all of I think I've seen all of Christopher Nolan's movies, but for me, it's his most like emotional and human one. Like, he does so much cool stuff, and there's so much insane sophistication and intellectual stuff in all of his movies, which is like part of why we go into, because there is something intellectually very stimulating about what he does. But it's interesting that he goes through story to like talk about these things too, because he's always trying to bring this back to some sort of something human, right? Because, and like in Interstellar, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen Interstellar, my God, go see this movie if you haven't seen Interstellar. But that scene where he's gone into the black hole and he's now in another dimension and he's in this thing where he can like see these projections of time, and he can see his daughter in there in like her bedroom when she was a kid. And he's like banging on this, like these projections of light basically. And it's creating almost like zero effect, but not nothing. Right. But like underneath this whole kind of crazy thing of like, whoa, he's gone through this black hole. He's in this other dimension. He's, there's this thing of him just trying to get through to his daughter, who he had just this terrible, the whole thing surrounding him leaving and the reasons why and how long he's been gone for. Like, it's just like, it's a freaking, like, it, to me, it's like just tugs. It's one of those movies that just like can really tug on your heartstrings with it. But there's like, to me, it's like, yeah, that's what it's about, really. Right? Like, yeah, there's all of this wild, crazy stuff that's going on, and we love that. But there's also this heart of everything that's going on in it too, right? That's like, yeah, here's this kind of cliffhanger thing that's going on. Here's this what the fuck is going on moment. But the thing that brings us in, that makes us care, is because it's just like, here's these characters, here's this relationship that they've done such a good job of making me feel, right? And making me want him to be able to, like, her to hear him and know that he's there, like there's just, that's using these tools in a way that's in service to something bigger, right? Like, and that's, again, I'll use that word, like the deep, right? Because I think at one point, I'm pretty sure, like thematically, in terms of what he was doing in that one, because there's a lot of stuff going on in that story. Like, there's talk about, the, like, obviously, like, climate change is a big thing because the earth is like going to be not inhabitable in not too long. And there's these questions of having to solve all of these giant problems and physics and stuff like that for how are we going to get everybody fucking out of here, and like going to other, traveling to other, like interstellar travel, all of this shit. There's all of that stuff going on. But at one point, I think it's Anne Hathaway's character is talking about, how do we know that love isn't quantifiable? The whole story is a love story. It's about love and the love connections that we have with other people, and what and the meaning and significance of that in a vast universe. To me, that's what this story is about, right? And it's like, holy shit, man, that's got nothing to, like, we can all connect to that. We can all relate to that. Like, we might not have any idea of anything else you're talking about. I get that. And that's at the center of that story. And I think that he was very much aware of that.
Have you ever heard this term, what's my in? That's something I've heard many people say, and I agree. It's like, you have the story. Okay, it's about interdimensional universes or whatever, it doesn't matter, but like, you got to always find what's your in. What's the thing, like, where do you find your in with this? What's the thing that makes this like real for you? And when you find that, that's really kind of like that's what tethers the rest together, right? Because like these really far out ideas, like you can take like Star Wars, for example. It's like a really far out idea, save the galaxy and stuff from the Empire. I mean, all of that sounds really great, like it does, but it's like about a father and a son and a sister and a brother and and it's about best friends. And it's about, being a nobody and realizing that maybe you're a somebody. It's all shit that we all relate to. What's your in on that? Like what lands with you about that? What makes that real for you? And then, you're off with this ragtag bunch of people like going to save the universe. And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, it's a pretty fucking awesome story. But like at the end of the day, it boils down to something a lot more simple. And Interstellar is a great example of that. It's like, at the end of the day, it's, like something I've noticed with like modern movies, and like the modern movies are struggling, a lot of them. Some of them is these gems that pop out every now and then. Wow, that was fucking awesome. But they're like, you're watching this happen right now with fucking studios. And it's like, you guys are breaking cardinal rules here. Cardinal fucking rules. Like, holy shit. Like someone gave you money to make something and you don't understand what you're doing. And there's a reason why nobody cares. And it's so easy. Like the thing is that I have to give some of these writers and creators credit, because like the visual masterpiece shit that you're doing and the epic scale in which you're putting it together is fucking incredible. But you're missing it. That's not what this is about. Man, like if you look at like fucking the Marvel series and all this stuff, right? It's so not about what it's become about. This is like it's the whole idea of being a superhero. That's the nobody into somebody story. Who out there feels like they're a nobody? Everybody. Come on, you face yourself in the mirror at the end of the day, like, I don't care if you walk around like you're the biggest piece, like you're the biggest fucking thing in the world, like you're the biggest fucking whatever, all this bravado, all this thing. When you fucking come back down to it, at the core of every one of us, there's something that feels like nothing, like you don't even exist and you don't matter and you're irrelevant, and there's a certain truth to that. And when stories help us tap into that and transcend it, we like applaud it, because it's like, there's something about that, right? There's a movie that came out recently, and I mean, I didn't love it. I have complaints about the story, but there's certain things about it that, I heard some people go, oh, well, that movie really hit me. And I'm like, this guy's basically massively obese. He's going to die. He's like distant relationship with his daughter, and he doesn't like himself, and there's something about this story which taps into something that's deep in a lot of us, right? Like, it's like the physical manifestation of something that we all feel inside, which is that my life's going to end. I never amounted to anything. I fucking played it safe. I did all this stuff. There's these things, but like, you can, like, I don't know what your in is, but audiences have an in and creators have an in, and everybody needs to find their in. And I think the part of the creator is that what you're doing is, when you create great work, whether you're an actor, a musician, a writer, whatever it might be, a painter, you're sharing your in with people. And if you try to do this work without having an in, even if you don't know you had an in, but if you try to do it as long as you have an in, there's a way for people to align and connect with your work in a way that is just moving. So I've shared this many times. I'll share it again, because it was the transformational moment for me as a writer. I wrote this script called Love Lost. It's just about a couple who broke up several years ago and get back together, and their night. It's like a play, basically. so many people got fucking wrapped up in that little story. You don't know these people. They're just a couple of people, guy and a girl who used to be in love. And now they're trying to figure out what that means now today in their lives. But you know what? I found an in, which is like, what if the love that I lost is gone forever? What if that was it? What if I can never get it back and that was it and I missed it and I didn't even know it was there? That was one of my ends. I guarantee you a few people fucking fell for that one. Not fell for it, but they fucking got into that. Someone wrote me when I asked people to give me feedback, so I sent it out to a few people. One person wrote me and it's like, man, that reminded me of my first love. And I forgot about that feeling. And like, that's the thing, you get fucking caught in. Another person told me, man, when the reveal happened, I threw the script across the room because they printed it out. They said, I threw the script across the room. And then I sat on the couch and I was seething. And then 30 minutes later, I had to pick it up and read the rest of it. And like these notes still so I try to remember when I'm writing, okay, Brandon, like this was a simple story. It was not about saving universes. It was not about superheroes. It didn't have all the fancy shit that a lot of times you need in a movie to really make it work. But I was like, let me tap into something real and see if I can write a story where just a couple people are in an apartment and see if I can make that interesting. And I figured if I could do that, I might have one of the core building blocks of being able to write a proper story. And I've based everything I've written off of that lesson now. And what I found is that it's all that same story. It just gets bigger in scale. And so I would say that I'm not a musician. I don't know what goes into music. I have some ideas, but I would imagine it's probably the same thing. I think there's an in, and then you build the sound on top of that, Maybe it's a riff or something, but there's something and it kind of connects with you, and then you go with that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I have a bit of experience with music, and like, yeah, sometimes, I mean, and I this is me saying this is somebody who has never performed well, actually, that's not true. Not entirely true, but for the most part has never really performed my own written music for anyone. Not really.
Well, you have.
I have, but like this, I haven't done a lot of it, and I have written some songs and stuff, whether they're any good or not, who fucking knows. But I mean, like it can come in so many different ways, is what I learned, because I did a challenge. I probably talked about it on the podcast when I was doing it, but I did a challenge to write a song every day for 30 days, which was tough. It was tough, but I did it, like, and it did teach me some things about writing music and writing songs and stuff like that. And sometimes, sometimes it would be words, and it would be like a particular line. It would be a particular thing. It's like, oh, this is what this thing is about. It's about this thing. But sometimes it would be a chord progression or something. I remember there was a couple of songs that came out of hearing a different song. I heard something, I was like, oh, I really like that chord progression. I really like how that melody goes. So I was like, okay, what is it? Find out, look it up, because I'm not good enough to just do it all by ear as of yet. But then I would do it, and it was interesting because then I would write a song off of that melody, right? Like, not trying to do that song, but just that melody, and like, what is that doing to me? What is that doing for me? Like, that's, to me, always like a good question for an artist to ask, is like, is this doing something to me? Right? It's like, that's kind of a good gauge as to whether you're in the right sort of territory, right? Where it's like, and you mentioned that earlier too, where it's just like where it's like, it's writing you and you're not writing it, where this thing is doing you, you're not doing it, right? There's something that is happening to you that is a little bit out of your control, right? It's kind of, it's appearing to you. And sometimes, yeah, it can feel like you're just dictating it, or you're just following this sort of trail that seems to be getting left for you. And you're like, what the fuck is going on? Like, all right. You're just, picking up the breadcrumbs and just going along. It's like, I don't know where this is going, but it's exciting. Like there's, and yeah, there's that unknown element. And, I think so many artists don't know that, don't understand that side of things. I know I didn't for a long period of time. That unknown element is an essential ingredient to great work, to genuine creation, and hopefully something that is art, right? So,
can I say something?
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say this, and I know this from personal experience, proven personal experience, is that it does help to have experience and knowledge and awareness and practice and discipline and study, and all of that does help. But it's not a guarantee. Because there's plenty of people I know who have all this stuff and they just can't quite get it to work. And I've had people come into my course who have never made a film before, never written a script before, and they've won massive awards, and it's just like, well, it's not fair. And the thing is, I would say that it would be difficult for the people who kind of come out of the gate and they succeed right off the bat. It's difficult for them to repeat it, because they don't really know what they did. So that's where your discipline and your practice and all that stuff becomes useful. It's more like you begin to have these skills and techniques and tools to go, oh, I see what I did there. Oh, that's how I did that. And then you can kind of replicate it and do it again. Whereas when someone comes in and they just kind of create something from the heart, they don't necessarily always know how they did it. And so it's hard for them to sometimes do it again, because they're like, well, what did I do? I had one filmmaker, writer, who came in and made their first film, and everybody cried at the first screening, super emotional. It was a big deal. It was like, where the hell did this come from? Like, well, what the heck's with this? And then they went off to they wanted to I want to turn this into a feature film, it's naturally progression, right? And they just were struggling because they got in their head about it. And the problem was they were trying to live up to that, and the film is great. It's a really great film. I still to this day, I love it. It's one of the ones I show a lot of my students to say, hey, this guy was never made a film, never read a script, never did anything. Thing is that, success, it's like with art, it is like a muse. If you try to be I know, I'm in control, I'll recreate it all. It's like, no, when you wrote that and created that, you tapped into something, you had an in. And so you're trying to take credit for that in. And that in is not, it wasn't you like you think it's you. It was you reacting, triggering, getting something activated. And that thing that you were unfamiliar with, that part of you that, doesn't live in your present awareness, it took over and it started to do the stuff. And so then, people, this happens, right? Where people, and there's other people who, they struggle and they struggle and they struggle. They just can't seem to get it. They can't seem to get it at all. And all of a sudden one day it just kind of works. It's like something, you're like, whoa, where did that come from? And it's just I don't know. I just was fucking fed up. And I just, it's yeah, you stop trying, right? Okay, but you have to, you have to be willing to let go of the kind of the control and the ego that comes around art. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, right? The other thing too, I think with art, and I know we're getting close to that witching hour, but I'll say this about it. It's you don't worry if it's good or not. Because the thing is you could be thinking you're writing just crap, and it could be great, and you think you're writing something so great and it's crap. You don't really know. That's why I say, like, as an audience member, is this fascinating you? Are you interested in this? Because whatever you're doing and whatever you're working on, it's ultimately leading you to where you're supposed to go next. And you got to look at it in terms of these moments are not always going to be like perfect seeming moments. They're going to be moments that are sometimes clunky and rough and whatever, but that's exactly what you needed to get to this next moment. And you might have a series of clunky moments, but then one breaks through. And what I found with writing and like in my journey, and it might not be the same for everybody. I've worked with a lot of people. I do see similarities, but I can say on my journey, it was like a scene worked. And this moment kind of like sung. And then I was able to string a couple together. And then I was able to string a few together. And then all of a sudden, I think I'm getting this. So like those, with every script I've written, and I've written probably like, or story, I've written over 30 for sure. I've written so many stories. I still remember these things. They live in me. They're alive. And, usually the moments where I found an in, those are the ones that are the most vivid because they're like a memory. Like when they happened, I still see them in my mind. I'm thinking of a script that I wrote in college, and it's still alive in my mind right now, like it really happened, like it's a memory, because I really experienced the moment as I wrote it. And these moments, you start to get confidence because you go, well, I could do that. And can I do it again? And can I just let myself do that? Can I let myself do that? And I don't know what it'll be. But I can tell you this. When those things start to come together, really interesting things happen. And I'm not saying everybody's going to like it. But maybe you don't want them to like it. Maybe you actually want to make them feel upset. Maybe you want them to throw the script across the room. And maybe you want them to not like it. But it's better to get an emotional reaction than to get this blasé kind of like, I could take it or leave it. So, I don't know, man. You got some thoughts, some beer?
Yeah, I'll just say one comment on a couple of things there that came to mind, and then we'll beer this and we'll call it a day. Yeah, there's you were mentioning that sometimes someone puts something in, like they write something that's coming from the heart. They don't understand why some of the things worked, and that's definitely a thing. The opposite is also true, where it's like, you could theoretically, hypothetically, take that same person who's like, oh, that's how I did all this stuff. And then they just try and go and do those things and be like, wait, why doesn't this one work? And it's like, well, because there's no fucking heart in this one. It's just all tools. This is all just techniques. And, from the origin of human storytelling, from when it was, a tribe of people sitting around a fire, there was no formal tools or techniques, and yet great stories were being told, right? Like it's like, to me, it's like, it's the tools and the things always flow out. They're always, what's the word? Like they're not the source, right? They're never the source. They are something that comes out of the source. There are ways in which people have figured out along the way. It's like, where you direct the source, where you go, it's like where everything is, these things came out of these new sort of story ideas, of ways of telling stories, of putting this cliffhanger on it. It's just like, that was something that was discovered, by people who are just like, and it came out of service to something, right? It came out of service to trying to communicate something that was very important, because that was typically, a while back when we were talking, I don't even remember which one it was called, but I remember having this sort of discovery in that conversation that, like, story is sacred. It is a sacred thing. That's where it came from, right? Like, the stuff that was being shared around the fire was stuff that was really fucking important, right? Like there was so much, there was so much that was being passed on to people, like wisdom, or just, even just day-to-day things about how do we get along with each other? How do we feel and connect with ourselves, with nature? Like there was like big things, right, that were being passed along, carried out. You know, and just because artistic industry really big business now doesn't mean that that's changed. Doesn't mean that that thing has changed, and I think we lose sight of that. So that was what I wanted to respond with.
I like it.
We're going to talk about beer here for a second. I was on this one today, and I'll be honest, like I wasn't super excited necessarily about what kind of a beer it was, although it was a hot day today, so I was like, a lager will be good. Like, whatever. But it was just this, you know, I love how they're branding at Phillips, you know, like I love their, you know, their design of all of their cans. They're fantastic. So this is from Phillips Brewing Company, and this is just called Tilt. It's got like a pinball kind of a graphic on it. And, you know, it has a kind of funny write-up as it usually does. Tilt is an off-the-wall, straight-up flippin' awesome lager. Craft brewed for maximum drinkability, Tilt is well-balanced and will leave you wanting to play again and again. Kick back, hit the jackpot, and score big with the Tilt lager. By the way, this is not a sponsorship. They're not paying us for this. We're just having this over the podcast. And, you know, it's a lager. It's good. It's kind of got a bit of a sweetness to it. But it's not like overly, you know, it still finishes really nice, and yeah, it's a good lager.
It's a good lager. I like the tradition. You know, this is, I'll just say this. I mean, yeah, it's a tradition. Evan and I, like this podcast started us having beers and conversations, but this tastes really good. I have to say that. Like, because a lot of time lagers, I'm just kind of, they're fine. They're cold. They're cool. They're kind of a nice thing. But like this one actually, I do have to say it stands out a little bit more. I thought it was really flavorful, even from the first sip till now. But we're gonna wrap this up. But I just wanted to share this because sometimes I like to share a story. You and I getting together, meeting for a coffee in Vancouver, kind of close to Main Street a lot of the time, and just we're working on this script and we're rewriting it and we're doing this. And then we would have our coffee and we'd be like, I think it was me, but I was like, you want to get a beer? And we'd go down and we'd get a beer. And then it kind of became like, let's just go for beer. And it was just like, we'd have these great conversations. And then we were like, we should record that shit because I'd like to listen to it later. And then someone was like, well, if you're going to record it, why don't you do a podcast? It's like, yeah, let's do a podcast if anyone listens. I just think it's funny. And I do like the beer. I do love kind of the tradition of it. It's just like it spurred on the conversation. So I don't know. Sometimes I like to reminisce and throw that back in and just remind everybody, this is why we're here. Good craft beer brought us together to some degree, and art. And that's why we talk about it. Yeah, man, I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts or should I start? Okay, well, I'll start because I have the mic. I'll tell you this. You know, we talked about a lot of things here. You know, I don't know, like if you've listened to this podcast episode and you're like, yeah, what do I do with this? Well, I mean, I don't know what your medium is, but I would say that, like, I write every day. Here, let me preface it with this. I write every single day for at least half an hour a day. And just to give you a kind of idea of how much discipline I have, I've written for over 11 years straight, never missed a single day, always written at least half an hour a day. The longest day I think I ever wrote was like 16 or maybe it was even 18 hours. I literally woke up, wrote until I passed out, and then went to sleep. And I've had multiple days where I've written like a lot. So I've definitely developed a lot of discipline. Statistically, I use Grammarly. It keeps track of how much I've written. In the last year and a half, I've written 6 million words. That actually, when I say that aloud, it sounds absolutely insane. So discipline, I believe in. I think it's important. I study screenwriting books. I study storytelling books. I read novels. I do all this stuff. it's worth it to do this if, say, this is your discipline. Mine's storytelling, and so that's why I focus on that. But none of that means anything, in my opinion, unless you fucking drill into the heart. Unless you tap into like the deep that Evan was referring to. There's something in there, and it doesn't always come when you want it. It doesn't come when you expect it. But if you hang out with it long enough, it'll show up. And when it shows up, it'll hit you hard. And all I can say is, like, you know, there's a script that I'm writing right now. I'm currently even working on it. And I went for a hike one day, had no intention of writing a story or anything. And I was coming back, and it just happened to be pretty late. And this was like, I think in the fall or winter. And it was getting dark pretty early. And I walked by this path and then as I walked down this path, I was still in the forest, and I just had this feeling of like something eerie, like following me. I don't know. It was just a weird thing. And I was like, oh man, what a creepy feeling of just being like followed by some entity, like in the woods as it gets dark. And it was kind of foggy and misty. And I was like, I'm going to write a short story about this. I went home. It turned into a feature, developed into this whole thing. You know, boom, it's just exploding into like this whole idea with all these characters. And it's like this fantastic story. And I'm like, it all just came because I was walking home from a hike too late, and I happened to pass something, and that word triggered something, and something happened. So, you know, the discipline helps me to put this stuff down. It helps me to write every day, to work it and develop it and figure it out. And I mean, even if someone stole that idea, it wouldn't even matter because they couldn't steal the essence of what I have. So what I would say is, you know, for those of you out there who have listened to this podcast up to this point, is like, do your disciplines, work on the thing, care, put attention into it, and just be available for something to hit you and find your in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have much to add to that, really. And I think that for me, the most important thing in this one, in terms of, you know, reminding myself, but also, you know, maybe a reminder for other people, but it's like, you know, it's the question of like, what is the whole thing really about? You know, like, that's the ultimate guide to everything. And knowing your technique is great stuff, but never make it about that, right? Because that becomes something that you can see, right? Like, if you spend enough time learning about a certain discipline and seeing other people doing it and whatever, there can come a time where you start to see it. You can see the work that's gone into something, as opposed to just being able to just being hit by something because there's something so incredible about it that you kind of get swept up into it, right? And it's about making the thing about the bigger things. And as I was saying before, it's like, sometimes it's about remembering that what you're doing is a kind of seeking. It's a kind of searching. You don't always know exactly what that thing is. Very often it's just a notion. It's a curiosity. It's a thing that's just sort of calling you into a certain direction, and you answer that call. And again, some of your best tools to take with you is just a complete openness and attention to what it presents you, right? As opposed to you just trying to put your shit onto it. Hey, look, if you're listening and paying attention and you have some mode of expression, you're going to come through in it, right? Because it's all that stuff is coming through your experience as a human being. Like, you can, to a certain extent, you can trust that that's going to happen, right, on its own. It can be surprising how much of you ends up in a piece of art that you didn't even intend on putting in there. Yeah. Right? But it's like, oh, holy shit, I didn't realize I was, you know, putting my whole fucking life out there for people to see. You know, that can happen, right? And it can happen just because you become so unconscious, because you're answering the call of whatever this thing is. And that thing is working on you and working through you. And, I like to say always when I talk in this kind of way, that it's like, I don't know what that is. I don't want to define that to put anybody off. She's like, but I know that it is. I know that it is a real thing. That thing that does that thing. That and I call it by many things. Tonight I'm calling it the deep, right? And it's a thing that's a little bit phenomenological. Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.